President al-Sisi bids farewell to the United Arab Emirates President Al Alamein, concluding his visit to Egypt. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi reaffirms Egypt's unwavering support for Lebanon during the meeting with Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam. And Egypt dispatches its 24th aid convoy from Rafah to Gaza via Qnews Abu Salim border crossing. In Al Alamein, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has bid farewell to United Arab Emirates President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, concluding his visit to Egypt. The meeting underscored the deep-rooted historical ties between both nations and the importance of continuous consultation to serve their mutual interests and bolster regional security. President al-Sisi expressed his profound appreciation for Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, highlighting the strong bond between their countries. The United Arab Emirates President in turn thanked President al-Sisi and Egyptian people for their warm hospitality, praising the continuous development of relations and their shared vision for the region's challenges. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has met with Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam to reaffirm Egypt's unwavering support for Lebanon. President al-Sisi praised Lebanon's recent strides towards stability and underscored Egypt's commitment to its economic recovery, reconstruction, and national unity. He also reiterated Egypt's position on Lebanese sovereignty and the full Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Lebanese Prime Minister Salam expressed gratitude for Egypt's support, highlighting the deep historical ties between the two nations. They agreed on the need for continued cooperation, especially on regional issues like the situation in Gaza, the importance of holding the 10th Egyptian-Lebanese Joint High Committee meeting. The meeting included top Egyptian ministers and both countries' ambassadors. Egypt has dispatched its 24th aid convoy under the Zaid al-Hazza Provision of Honor from Egypt to Gaza initiative from Rafah to Gaza via Qnews Abu Salim border crossing. The Egyptian Red Crescent prepared the convoy with 60 trucks. This marks a shift from previous days when multiple smaller convoys were sent. The convoy includes 3 trucks of fuel that Israeli authorities had previously refused to admit. However, Egypt is insistent on sending the fuel due to the critical need for hospitals, desalination plants, and power stations in the war-torn area. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati has urged Germany to pressure Israel to lift restrictions on humanitarian aid and end its settlement policies. In a call with his German counterpart, Abdulati emphasized the need for a ceasefire and advocated for a viable 60-day ceasefire proposal that would allow for detainee release and aid delivery. The two foreign ministers discussed regional issues, especially the dire situation in Gaza. They also discussed the Iranian nuclear file, with Abdulati stressing the importance of resuming negotiations and restoring cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency to prevent regional instability. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati has discussed his crisis in Gaza, the crisis rather in Gaza, with his Danish counterpart. During their phone call, Abdulati praised the strategic partnership between the two countries, highlighting the recent visit of Egyptian President Fattah al-Sisi to Denmark and expressed hope for increased trade and investment. The ministers also addressed the critical situation in Gaza, with Abdulati urging Denmark to use its leadership roles in the EU and UN Security Council to pressure Israel for a ceasefire and humanitarian aid access. He also welcomed nations recognizing a Palestinian state and also encouraged Denmark to follow suit, while also praising Denmark's continued support for UNRWA. And for more analysis, we are now moving to Hani Saif in our newsroom. Hani.
Ladies and gentlemen, for more understanding of this, we're joined from Cairo by Al-Ahram Managing Editor, Mr. Mohammed Izzuddin. Mr. Izzuddin, welcome to Q News. How might the strong bilateral relationship between Egypt and the United Arab Emirates influence their respective foreign policies towards other nations, especially in the Middle East?
Thank you for having me. Of course, the bilateral relations between Egypt and the UAE reflects lots of benefits that can benefit the region as a whole, especially the agreement on key issues and points, in addition to the mutual respect for each state's sovereignty, and also the approach and methodism in dealing, which was noted between the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Mohammed bin Zayed. These bilateral relations have been ongoing since the foundation of the Emirati state, especially the Abu Dhabi Emirate, since the day of the passing Sheikh Zayed, may he rest in peace. And the relations got way stronger after the 2013 revolution, the June revolution in Egypt. The relations between the two countries are quite strong. They have lots of aspects, economical, where the UAE poured millions and millions in investment, and
Mr. Izzuddin, now the UAE continuously praises Egypt's development of relations and the shared vision for the region's challenges. So what are the strategic implications of these praises for the region's challenges as a whole?
Certainly, Egypt's stance is clear on the issues in the Middle East. Also, in other issues and cases, especially combating terrorism and opposing the separatist tendencies, and supporting the stability of the region's states, and pushing the peace efforts inside the Middle East. Also supporting sustainable development. Egypt also highlights the need of the Arab states and other southern states to be prosperous and to try to contribute as much efforts as they can. The two states have been doing so for the past previous years. they also have agreed on the religious discourse they're gonna use, which respects diversity and rejects fanaticism. They have lots of agreements in business, in commerce, culturally, and in combating extremism.
Yes, well, sir, how does Egypt's reaffirmation of a full Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon factor into the broader geopolitical dynamics of the region, especially regarding tensions with Israel?
Egypt always supports the sovereignty and the unity of the Arab states. Since 2011 and what followed when chaos erupted throughout the region, it swamped the region. As you saw, today President al-Sisi met the Lebanon's Prime Minister, where he affirmed Egypt's stance on supporting Lebanon, which is deeply rooted in our diplomatic and political stance. We support the Arab security. We oppose the states who are renowned for being aggressors or violating the sovereignty and borders of other states, just like the Israeli occupation did. Egypt always supports peace efforts and the unity of the Arab states, their sovereignty, and we will provide all aid and assistance necessary to combat terrorism and extremism.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you've mentioned, Mr. Izzeddin, now Egypt's meeting with the Lebanese Prime Minister Salem signals its continued relevance and influence as a regional mediator and supporter of Arab states. So how does this reflect and what does it signal to the rest of the international community, and does it influence or dictate anything in the upcoming period?
Supports the unity of nations and their sovereignty, and is keen on peace and rejects all aggressions done by terrorist organizations who want to dismantle states and who possesses separatist tendencies. Egypt is a sponsor of peace efforts in the region and the ceasefire in Palestine. Egypt is always keen on doing that for its neighbors and Arab counterparts. The Prime Minister of Lebanon saw the President al-Sisi affirmed our stance on the unity of Lebanon, and he expressed our support, which is the only way for peace and prosperity.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Mohammed Izzeddin from Cairo, the Al-Ahram managing editor. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us here on Q News. Ladies and gentlemen, now we go back to Rana Al-Assas in our studio. Rana.
Thank you so much, Hani. And now we move on to the latest developments in Gaza.
العظيم ولا حبة رز، والله العظيم ولا حبة عدس. ما فيش أكل، ما فيش شرب، عندي بنت 2.5 صارت تصدم.
U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has announced President Donald Trump will share a major White House meeting on Wednesday focused on Gaza, outlining a comprehensive plan aimed at resolving the conflict by year end. Witkoff revealed that Israel is open to continuing discussions with Hamas, showing flexibility if the group reciprocates. Details of the plan and meeting participants remain undisclosed, but the U.S. hopes for a robust, well-meaning approach to bring lasting peace. Hamas has condemned Israel for holding at least 726 Palestinian bodies, some for decades, describing the practice as a heinous Zionist crime that reveals sadism and brutality. The group said the inhumane policy has worsened since October 7, 2023, and warned that the actual number of undisclosed bodies in Gaza could be higher. Hamas called on the international community to pressure Israel to end this practice. The Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs expatriates has warned that Israel's time management game is a deliberate political trap. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry urges that prolonging the war on Gaza is intended to erode international consensus and calls for an immediate halt to the genocide. The ministry highlighted the catastrophic impact of this delay on civilians, with a growing number of deaths from starvation and malnutrition and bombings. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry is pursuing diplomatic legal action to hold the international community accountable and emphasized that its failure to address the humanitarian disaster is inexcusable. Gaza-based health authorities has announced that the death toll from the Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip has climbed to over 62,800 and over 158,900 were wounded. The Gaza Ministry of Health has reported that hospitals in the Gaza Strip have received 76 Palestinians and injured 290 others in only the past 24 hours. Pope Leo has issued a renewed and urgent appeal to end the conflict in the Holy Land, calling on both sides and the international community to make it a priority for peace and protect civilians. Speaking during his weekly audience at the Vatican on Wednesday, the Pontiff urged for a permanent ceasefire, the release of all detainees, and the unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid. He also endorsed a joint statement by the Greek Orthodox and Latin Patriarchs of Jerusalem, calling for an end to the war and the protection of all communities in the region. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has condemned the unjustifiable killing of journalists in Gaza, calling it an unacceptable attack on press freedom. Speaking at a political conference in Rimini, Meloni warned that Israel's military response has gone beyond proportionality, endangering Christian communities and the viability of a two-state solution. She urged Israel to end its military occupation of Gaza, stop settlement expansion, allow humanitarian aid into the enclave, and consider proposals from Arab nations to establish regional stability. Meloni also called for international pressure on Hamas to release Israeli detainees still in captivity. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid has revealed that the top mediators involved in ceasefire talks are puzzled by Prime Minister Netanyahu's lack of response to the latest his proposal. Speaking to Israel's army radio, Lapid said mediators told him Hamas has accepted the conditions Netanyahu set, yet the Israeli government has not replied. Lapid said they called him to ask if he knows why Netanyahu hasn't gotten back to them. The United Nations Human Rights Office has reported that at least 982 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces and settlers in the occupied West Bank since the start of the Gaza conflict on October 7, 2023. Highlighting recent violence, the UN condemned last week's raid on a village near Ramallah, calling it another example of ongoing oppression and coercion against Palestinians. Local officials also reported the destruction of around 3,000 olive trees in the village during the military operations. Israeli occupation security forces confiscated approximately 1.5 million shekels, $447,000 from a money exchange shop in Ramallah during a raid yesterday, alleging the funds are destined for Hamas. The seized cash included various currencies such as US dollars, Jordanian dinars, and euros. 9 people were arrested during the operation. The raid also resulted in injuries to dozens of Palestinians, including a 13-year-old child who was shot. Raids are common across the occupied West Bank, but incursions into central Ramallah, the seat of the Palestinian Authority, are relatively very rare. Gaza's government media office has warned that more than 95% of the population is now unable to afford basic food items due to extreme poverty and lack of income. In a statement, the office accused Israel of enforcing a starvation policy, saying essential goods like meat, fish, dairy, fruit, vegetables, and nutritional supplements remain banned from entering the enclave. It held Israel, the U.S. administration, and allied governments fully responsible for what it described as a policy of starvation and broader war crimes in Gaza. Gaza's government media office condemned Israel for permitting just 14% of required food supplies into the enclave, calling it a systematic starvation crime. The office reports that 313 people, including 119 children, have died from hunger and malnutrition, with the most vulnerable children, the sick, and the elderly most at risk. It also added that the Israeli forces have closed all crossing and banned over 430 essential food items, creating an 86% shortfall in aid deliveries over the past month. Reuters has published an obituary for Palestinian cameraman Hussein al-Masri, who was killed in an Israeli military strike at Nasser Hospital in Gaza. Al-Masri, who joined Reuters in May 2024, had been documenting the war from one of Gaza's most dangerous areas. He is remembered as a courageous and respected journalist by his colleagues and community members. Reuters editor-in-chief Alessandra Galloni praised al-Masri's bravery, calling his death a deep loss for the newsroom. The obituary follows public criticism over the agency's initial coverage, which referred to Al-Masri only as a contractor, prompting backlash over perceived minimizing of his role. Al-Masri leaves behind a wife battling cancer and 4 children.
كنت أسعد هنا أنا وأسرتي.
Canadian photojournalist Valerie Zink has ended her 8-year relationship with Reuters, accusing the agency of enabling the targeting of journalists in Gaza. In a post on X, Zink condemned Reuters' perpetration of Israeli propaganda, especially following the death of Palestinian journalist Anas al-Sharif and 5 others in a recent Israeli strike. She said continuing with the agency would bring shame and grief and vowed to honor the courage of Gaza's journalists in her future work. The United Nations Security Council is set to hold its regular monthly open session today to discuss the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian cause. Members are scheduled to begin the session with a briefing from Ramiz al-Baghour, the UN Deputy Special Coordinator for Middle East Peace Process, following by closed consultations. Israel's expansion of its military aggression in Gaza is expected to be a primary focus of the session. Israeli occupation forces and Israeli tanks were sighted near the Gaza border as smoke billowed from the Gaza Strip. This deployment follows a recent return to combat in Jabalia to dismantle tunnels. That comes as the Israeli Security Cabinet is expected to approve an expanded military offensive in Gaza. The offensive, aimed at seizing control of Gaza City, is likely to be delayed for a few weeks, allowing Egyptian and Qatari mediators time to resume ceasefire talks. Thousands of Israelis gathered outside the defense ministry in Tel Aviv, calling on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reach a ceasefire agreement with Hamas and secure the release of detainees held in Gaza. Protesters carried flags and placards which featured images of the detainees demanding urgent action. The current proposal calls for a 60-day ceasefire and the release of 10 living detainees and 18 bodies by Hamas in exchange for Israel freeing about 200 long-term Palestinian prisoners. Negotiations on a permanent ceasefire would follow. Israel believes around 20 of the 50 remaining detainees are still alive. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's what we have been covering. In Al Alamein, President al-Sisi bids farewell to the United Arab Emirates president, concluding his visit to Egypt. President al-Sisi reaffirms Egypt's unwavering support for Lebanon during the meeting with Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam. And Egypt dispatches its 24th aid convoy for Rafah to Gaza via Karm Abu Salem border crossing. This concludes our news bulletin for this hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.